The trapper's hands were numb as he dragged the Apache girl from the frozen river. Her lips were blue and her body limp. She wasn't breathing. He pressed hard on her chest, counting under his breath, until water spilled from her mouth and she gasped. Her dark eyes opened, filled with terror and confusion. Then she did something he didn't expect. She wrapped her trembling arms around him and held on as if he were the only solid thing left in the world. That's when he heard the horse behind him. He turned slowly. The Apache warrior sat perfectly still on his paint horse, his face unreadable, a rifle across his lap. The girl whispered something in her language, and the warrior's eyes narrowed. The warrior dismounted. The trapper released the girl gently, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. The warrior approached, looked at his wife shivering in the trapper's coat, then at the broken ice in the river. Understanding passed between them without words. The silence of that frozen morning felt heavier than any words could carry. I should have kept riding that December morning. My trap lines were already set further north, and I'd planned to reach the high country before the next storm hit. But something made me stop at that bend in the river. Maybe the unusual quiet, maybe the tracks I'd noticed earlier that didn't belong to deer or elk. When I heard the crack of ice and the scream, I didn't think, I just ran. The Apache girl had fallen through where the current ran fastest, and the cold was already pulling her under. I dove in before my mind could tell me it was suicide. The shock of that water felt like drew out knives in my chest. I caught her hair, then her arm, and dragged us both toward the edge. Getting out was harder than getting in. But there was something about the way she looked at me when she came back to consciousness. Not with gratitude exactly, but with a question. Like she was trying to figure out what kind of man saves a stranger when it might cost him everything. When her husband appeared on that ridge, I knew my life had just become a lot more complicated. His name was Dakota, though I wouldn't learn that for another hour. He spoke some English, learned from traders. And what I didn't know then was that his wife, Ayana, wasn't supposed to be near the river at all. She'd been running from something. Dakota's rifle stayed pointed at the ground, but his hand never moved far from it. Ayana spoke rapidly in Apache, gesturing to the river, to me, to her soaked clothing. I caught a few words that sounded like explanations, maybe even pleas. Dakota's jaw tightened. He finally looked at me directly and said in broken English, "You pull her from water." It wasn't a question. I nodded. Yes, he studied me for a long moment, his dark eyes measuring something I couldn't name. Then he did something unexpected. He offered his hand. When I shook it, his grip was iron. "Dakota," he said. "James," I replied. Ayana watched us both, still trembling, despite my coat wrapped around her shoulders. There was something in her expression that troubled me. Relief mixed with fear, but not fear of her husband. Fear of something else. Dakota pulled a blanket from his horse and wrapped it around Ayana, speaking to her in low, urgent tones. She responded quietly, her eyes darting to the tree line as if expecting something to emerge. That's when I noticed what I'd missed before. Dakota had been riding hard. His horse's flanks were heaving, and there was sweat frozen in its mane despite the cold. "You run from something?" I asked. Dakota's expression darkened. "White men come. 5, maybe 6. They look for Ayana." My blood went cold. Why? But I already knew the answer from the way Ayana pulled the blanket tighter and looked at the ground. Men like that didn't need reasons that made sense to anyone but themselves. What I didn't know was that I had just made a choice that would put me between the most dangerous gang in Wyoming territory and the woman they decided to claim as property. Dakota spoke with the economy of a man who'd learned that words could mean the difference between life and death. The men hunting Ayana were led by a rancher named Caldwell, who controlled most of the valley and believed he controlled the people in it too. Ayana had been at the trading post 3 days ago when Caldwell saw her. He decided then that she would be his, regardless of her marriage, her people, or her own will. When she refused, he sent his men. Dakota had been hunting when they came to their camp. Ayana ran, but what troubled me most wasn't just Caldwell's cruelty, it was the way Dakota looked at me when he said, "They follow her tracks here. They come soon." I glanced at the riverbank, seeing now what I'd been too focused to notice before. Our tracks in the snow told a clear story, and winter doesn't hide secrets. It preserves them. "How long do we have?" I asked. already knowing the answer wouldn't be good. Dakota looked at the sun, now climbing toward noon. 1 hour, maybe less. He turned to Ayana, speaking rapidly in Apache. She shook her head, arguing, but he cut her off with a sharp gesture. When he turned back to me, his expression was grim. I take her to my people, 3 days north. But Caldwell's men, they know this land. They ride faster. The unspoken question hung between us. I could walk away now, return to my trap lines, pretend I'd never stopped at this river. But Ayana was looking at me with those dark eyes, and I saw in them something I'd seen in a mirror once. The look of someone who'd lost faith that anyone would stand between them and the wolves. I'll buy you time, I heard myself say. Dakota's eyebrows rose slightly. You fight 6 men alone. When he put it like that, it sounded insane. It probably was. I don't have to fight them, just slow them down, make them think twice about which trail to follow. Dakota studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. You do this. You make enemy of Caldwell. He owns the law here. He owns the land. He owns the men with badges. I'd met men like Caldwell before. Men who thought power meant permission. What I didn't tell Dakota was that I'd been running from my own past for 2 years now. Maybe it was time to stop running and face something head on, even if it wasn't my own demons. Dakota gave me something before he rode north with Ayana, a small leather pouch that hung on a cord. Apache medicine, he said, for protection. I didn't believe in magic, but I believed in the intention behind gifts. As I watched them disappear into the tree line, Ayana looked back once. The gratitude in her expression was complicated by something else. Worry, maybe, or guilt that I was staying behind to face men who wanted her dead, or worse. I turned my attention to the tracks, to the river, to the landscape around me. If Caldwell's men were good trackers, they'd see 3 sets of prints leaving this area. Mine, Dakota's, and Ayana's. My job was to make them follow mine. I loaded my rifle, checked my revolver, and started walking downstream, making sure every step left a clear impression in the snow. Behind me, I heard the first distant sounds of horses. The riders appeared on the ridge exactly when Dakota predicted. 6 of them spread out in a loose line, moving with the confidence of men who'd never faced real consequences. I recognized the type immediately, ranch hands who'd been given too much authority and not enough supervision. The kind who saw every person weaker than them as an opportunity to prove something. The man in front was older, was he maybe 40, with a thick beard and a buffalo coat that marked him as Caldwell's foreman. He raised his hand and the line stopped. They'd found my tracks. I was a quarter-mile downstream by then, positioned behind a fallen cottonwood with good sight lines. The foreman dismounted, studying the ground. I could see him working through it. 3 sets of tracks entering the river area, but only one leaving in this direction. The others had headed north. He'd have to make a choice. I fired once, high and to the left. The shot echoed off the canyon walls. The horses spooked, men shouted. The foreman dropped behind his mount, and the others scattered for cover. I didn't fire again. The point wasn't to kill anyone, not yet. The point was to make them cautious, to make them think that following this trail meant facing someone who knew how to shoot and wasn't afraid to do it. After a minute, the foreman called out, "You're interfering with legal business, friend. Mr. Caldwell is a United States Marshal. That Indian girl is wanted for theft." The lie was so casual it almost sounded rehearsed. I didn't respond. Let them wonder who I was and what I wanted. What I hadn't expected was how personal this would become when the foreman shouted my name. "James Garrett, we know who you are." My blood froze. The foreman's voice carried across the snow with perfect clarity. "Caldwell knows about Kansas City, about the bank examiner you killed. You help us bring in that Indian girl, maybe he forgets what you did." The words hit harder than bullets. Kansas City was 2 years behind me, buried under a different name and 100 miles of running. How did Caldwell know? How long had he known? I forced myself to think clearly. This could be a bluff, a way to shake me, to make me reveal myself or run. But the specific detail, the bank examiner, that wasn't public knowledge. That was something only a handful of people knew, and most of them wanted me dead or in prison. I stayed silent. But my mind was racing. The bank examiner in Kansas City had been dirty, taking bribes from land speculators while families lost their farms. I'd confronted him one night outside a saloon, and the conversation had turned violent. He drew first. I was faster. But he was connected, and I was just a ranch hand with opinions about justice. They called it murder within an hour. I'd been running ever since. Now Caldwell had found me, and he was using it as leverage. The foreman called out again, "You got 1 minute to show yourself, Garrett. After that, we come get you, and we bring you back in pieces." I calculated distances and angles. 6 men, decent shots probably, but bunched together now behind their horses. If this turned into a real fight, someone would die, maybe several someones. That would make everything worse. Then I heard something that changed everything. A seventh horse coming fast from the direction of town. The riders heard it too. They turned, hands dropping to weapons, then relaxing when they saw who it was. The man who arrived wore a marshal's badge that caught the winter light. He was in his 50s, with silver hair and the kind of face that had seen too much to be impressed by threats. He spoke briefly with the foreman, his voice too low for me to hear. But I saw the foreman's body language change from aggressive to defensive. After a moment, the marshal called out, "James Garrett, if that's who you are, I'm Marshal Clayton. I'm ordering these men to return to town. But I need your word you'll come in tomorrow and we'll talk about this situation proper." It could be a trap, probably was a trap, but something in Clayton's voice sounded different from the foreman's casual cruelty. It sounded tired, like a man who'd seen enough blood to last a lifetime and didn't want to see more. I stood slowly, rifle pointed at the ground, visible but not surrendering. "These men were hunting a woman who didn't commit any crime," I shouted back. Clayton nodded as if he'd expected that answer. "I know, and we'll discuss that, but not here. Not like this. You have my word as a marshal. You come in tomorrow. We talk, and you walk out free regardless. These men go back now." The foreman started to argue, but Clayton cut him off with a look that could have frozen the river again. After a long, tense moment, the foreman mounted his horse. The other riders followed suit, but not before one of them, a younger man with a scar across his cheek, stared at me with pure hatred. That was the man I'd need to watch for. What I didn't know was that Marshal Clayton's protection would last exactly 18 hours and that the young man with the scar was Caldwell's son. I waited until the riders disappeared before moving. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the adrenaline finally catching up. I'd bought Dakota and Ayana maybe half a day, possibly less if Caldwell's men doubled back or split up. But Clayton's intervention had changed something. Either the marshal was genuinely trying to prevent bloodshed, or Caldwell's grip on the law wasn't as complete as Dakota believed. I needed to know which before I walked into town tomorrow. I followed the river north, avoiding the main trail, thinking through my options. Every one of them ended badly. If I ran now, I'd be running forever, and Caldwell would know he could use my past against me anytime. If I stayed and fought, I'd be one man against a rancher who apparently owned half the territory. If I went to Clayton, I was gambling that the marshal's word meant something in a place where power usually trumped principle. By the time I reached my camp that evening, I'd made a decision. I was going to town tomorrow, but I was also going to find out everything I could about Caldwell, Clayton, and why a rancher would go to such lengths for one Apache woman. Something about this situation didn't add up. Men like Caldwell had access to anything they wanted. Why obsess over Ayana specifically? Why send 6 men after her through winter terrain? Why risk exposure by involving someone like me who had nothing to lose? I built a fire, cleaned my rifle, and tried to sleep. But every sound made me reach for my weapon. Around midnight, I heard something moving outside. I grabbed my revolver and crept to the door. Standing there just beyond the firelight was an old Apache man I'd never seen before. He spoke in English, his voice like gravel. "Dakota say you help his wife. I bring message." The old man's name was Neol, and he'd been watching me since the confrontation at the river. "Dakota want you to know Caldwell not just want Ayana for taking. He want her because she knows secret." He paused, his weathered face unreadable in the darkness. "She know where gold is." The words hung in the cold air. Gold. Of course, the territory had seen a dozen strikes in the last 5 years, some real, most false hopes. But if Ayana knew the location of a legitimate claim, that would explain Caldwell's obsession. It would also explain why he wanted her alive. How does she know? I asked. Neil's expression darkened. Her father was scout for army. He find gold in sacred place. Tell no one but family. Then he die. Caldwell hear rumors. He think Ayana will tell him if he make her his wife or make her scared enough. That changed everything. This wasn't about power or cruelty anymore. It was about money, which made men infinitely more dangerous. Where is this gold? I asked. Neil shook his head. Even I not know. Only Ayana, and she never tell white man. Gold is in place where her ancestors buried. She died before she gave it away. He moved closer, his eyes intense. But Caldwell not give up. He come for her. He come for Dakota. He come for anyone who helped them. I realized then that I wasn't just buying time for two people to escape. I was standing between a corrupt rancher and a fortune that would destroy whatever was left of the Apache lands in this territory. The question wasn't whether to help anymore. The question was how to survive what came next. Morning came too fast. I rode into town expecting trouble and found it waiting on Main Street. Not Caldwell's men this time, but something worse. The marshal's office had burned during the night. The building was still smoking, and Clayton was standing in front of it with a face like carved stone. When he saw me, something in his expression shifted from anger to resignation. "You shouldn't have come," he said quietly. "Where's Marshal Clayton?" I asked, though I already knew the answer from the way folks were avoiding eye contact. The man standing in front of me was Clayton, but the badge on his chest was gone. "Caldwell had me removed last night, said I overstepped my authority interfering with his property recovery." The territorial governor agreed. "Caldwell's the marshal now." My gut twisted. Of course he was. Men like Caldwell didn't just own land. They owned titles, positions, legal authority. Clayton looked older in the morning light, tired in a way that went deeper than lost sleep. "The girl you helped, Ayana, Caldwell's put a bounty on her. $500 dead or alive. Anyone who helps her is charged with obstruction and theft. That includes you." $500 was more money than most men in this territory would see in a year. Every bounty hunter, desperate ranch hand, and opportunistic drifter would be looking for Ayana now. "This is about gold," I said. Clayton's eyebrows rose slightly. "So you know." He glanced around, checking who might be listening, then gestured for me to follow him behind the burned building. When we were alone, he spoke quietly. "Ayana's father found a deposit in the mountains 3 years ago, big enough to matter. He died before filing a claim. Under law, that gold belongs to whoever finds it and files first. But it's on Apache land, sort of. The boundaries are disputed. Caldwell figures if he controls Ayana, he controls the information and the claim. Why don't the Apache just move her somewhere Caldwell can't reach?" Clayton's laugh was bitter. "You think they haven't tried? Caldwell has informants in every tribe within 200 miles. He's been planning this for months, waiting for the right moment. When she went to the trading post alone, he saw his chance." I thought about Dakota and Ayana. 3 days north by now if they were lucky. 3 days wasn't enough. Caldwell would have riders out already, spreading word of the bounty, cutting off escape routes. "What if someone filed the claim first?" I asked. Clayton looked at me like I'd suggested flying to the moon. "You'd need to know where the gold is, reach it before Caldwell's men, stake it proper, and get the claim to the land office. That's 3 days hard riding minimum through winter terrain with every gun in the territory hunting you." He paused. "And you'd probably die trying." But I was already thinking about Neil's words, about Ayana's determination to protect her father's secret, about the fact that I'd stopped running once. Maybe I could stop running forever if I found a way to end this. I found Neil that night at the edge of town, waiting in the shadows like he'd known I'd come. "I need to reach Dakota and Ayana," I said. "And I need to convince Ayana to tell me where the gold is." Neil's expression didn't change. "She will not tell white man." "Then Caldwell wins. He'll hunt her forever. He'll destroy her people looking for that information." I stepped closer. "But if someone else files the claim first, someone who'd give it back to the Apache, Caldwell has nothing to chase." For the first time, something flickered in Neil's ancient eyes. Interest, maybe, or the faint spark of hope. You would do this. Give gold back. I don't want the gold. I want Caldwell to lose. There's a difference. Neil studied me for a long moment, and I had the uncomfortable feeling he was seeing past all my words into whatever truth lived underneath. Finally, he nodded. I take you to them, but if Ayanna say no, you walk away. Deal. We rode north through the darkness, and Neil moved through the winter landscape like a ghost, finding paths I would never have seen. By dawn, we'd covered ground that should have taken twice as long. The sun was climbing when we finally spotted smoke from a small fire hidden in a canyon. Dakota saw us coming and had his rifle ready, but when he recognized Neil, he lowered it. Ayanna stepped out from behind a rock shelter, and I saw the moment she recognized me. Surprise followed by worry. Dakota spoke in rapid Apache with Neil, and I caught enough of the tone to know they were arguing about me. Finally, Dakota turned and said in English, Why you come? You bring danger. I came because there is a way to end this, I said, but it means taking a risk. I looked at Ayanna. It means trusting me with the location of your father's gold. The silence that followed was heavier than the mountains around us. Ayanna's face went through several expressions: anger, fear, suspicion. When she finally spoke, her English was better than I expected. My father died protecting that secret. Why I give it to you? Because Caldwell won't stop, ever. He'll chase you until he gets what he wants or you're dead. But if I file the claim first in your name, under Apache ownership, he loses. The gold stays with your people, and you stay alive. Dakota translated parts of it, and they argued in Apache for several minutes. Finally, Ayanna looked at me with those dark eyes that had first seen me pull her from the river. If you lie, if you take gold for yourself, my husband will kill you. I promise this. I know, I said, and meant it. She drew a map in the dirt with a stick, showing landmarks and distances. The gold was 2 days northeast in a canyon marked by 3 standing stones. But what she said next made my blood run cold. Caldwell's men already looked there. They not find it because they not know where to dig. But they come back. They always come back. We left within the hour. Me, Dakota, and Neil. Ayanna stayed hidden with 2 other Apache who'd arrived during the night. Older women who'd brought supplies and would move her again if needed. Dakota didn't want to leave his wife, but she'd insisted with a strength that reminded me why Caldwell wanted her in the first place. She wasn't just protecting gold, she was protecting identity, heritage, the memory of her father. The ride northeast was brutal. Winter had settled into the mountains with teeth, and the wind cut through layers of clothing like they were paper. Dakota led, following landmarks only he could see, while Naol watched our back trail for signs of pursuit. I spent the time thinking about what came after we found the gold. Filing a claim meant going to the land office, which meant exposure, which meant Caldwell would know exactly where I was. But maybe that was the point. Maybe it was time to stop hiding. On the second day we reached the canyon. 3 standing stones marked the entrance, just as Ayanna had described, their surfaces carved with symbols I didn't recognize. Dakota stopped, and for a moment his expression was complicated. Respect, maybe, or fear. This is sacred place, he said quietly. Ayanna's ancestors buried here. We must show respect. I nodded, understanding that this wasn't just about gold anymore. This was about trust, about a culture that had been betrayed so many times that faith in any outsider was an act of courage. We entered the canyon on foot, leaving the horses. The walls rose steep on both sides, and in the winter silence every footstep echoed. Neil moved ahead, searching, and after 20 minutes he stopped at a specific spot where the rock face had a slight overhang. Here, he said, pointing to a mark on the stone, a small symbol that looked like a bird. We dug for an hour, the ground frozen and stubborn, until my shovel hit something solid. It wasn't gold. It was a metal box, army issue, weathered by years underground. Inside were documents, claim papers, surveys, letters, and at the bottom, wrapped in cloth, were samples of ore that glittered even in the dim canyon light. Ayanna's father had been thorough. He'd done everything right, documented everything, prepared a legal claim, but he'd never filed it. Why didn't he file? I asked, holding the papers. Dakota's face was grim. because he knew what would happen. White men would come, they would take land, destroy sacred places, bring violence. He chose to let gold stay hidden rather than bring that destruction. I understood then what I was really holding. Not just wealth, but responsibility. This gold could save Ayana and Dakota, but it could also destroy everything they were trying to protect. There's another way, I said slowly, an idea forming. What if we don't file a claim for the gold? What if we file a claim that this land is a burial ground, protected by territorial law? No mining allowed. The look on Dakota's face told me this had never occurred to him. We'd come for gold, but maybe the real treasure was keeping it buried. We rode hard back to town with the documents, but we weren't alone anymore. On the second day, I spotted riders on our back trail, 3 of them moving fast. Caldwell's men, probably drawn by reports from his network of informants. They're half a day behind, I said. We can't outrun them all the way to the land office. Dakota checked his rifle. Then we fight. We'd lose, I said. 3 of us against professional guns. We need to be smarter. Neil, who'd been silent most of the ride, spoke up. There is old cavalry fort 1 day south, abandoned, strong walls. We make stand there, wait for help. What help? I asked. But Neil just smiled grimly and kicked his horse into a faster pace. The fort appeared at dusk, a cluster of rotting buildings surrounded by a wooden palisade that had seen better decades. But the walls still stood, and there was only one gate, defensible if we were smart about it. We got the horses inside and barricaded the gate with whatever we could find. Dakota took position at the wall facing our back trail, and I checked the ammunition we had. Not much, maybe enough for a short fight, not enough for a siege. Neil, what help were you talking about? I pressed. He was building a small fire in the center of the fort, arranging stones in a specific pattern. I send message before we leave canyon. My nephew sees signal. He bring others. How many others? Enough. I hoped he was right, because the riders would be here by morning. And after that, it was just a question of whether we could hold out long enough for whatever rescue Neil had arranged. That night, I barely slept. Every sound was a potential threat. Every shadow a possible enemy. Dakota seemed at ease, though, his rifle resting across his lap, his eyes scanning the darkness with practiced patience. You have woman, James? He asked suddenly. The question caught me off guard. No, not anymore. Why you do this then? Risk everything for people not your family? I thought about Kansas City and running and all the years of looking over my shoulder. Maybe I'm tired of being afraid, I said finally. Maybe helping someone else is a way to help myself. Dakota considered this, then nodded. In my language, we have word, tutsan, mean brave for others. That is what you do. I didn't feel brave. I felt terrified, but I appreciated the thought. As dawn broke, we saw them. Not 3 riders, but 7. Caldwell had sent reinforcements, and leading them, visible even from a distance, was the young man with the scar across his cheek. Caldwell's son. This wasn't just about gold anymore. This was personal. The first shot came at sunrise, kicking up dirt near the gate. A warning. Then Caldwell's son called out, his voice carrying across the open ground. James Garrett, you got something belongs to Mr. Caldwell. Send out the Indian and the papers, and maybe we let you walk away. I didn't respond. No point in wasting breath on lies. He tried again. You know who I am. I'm Daniel Caldwell. My father owns this territory. You can't win this. Dakota looked at me, eyebrow raised. I shrugged. Rich men's sons always think shouting their name means something. Despite everything, Dakota almost smiled. The next shot wasn't a warning. It splintered the wood near my head, and I dropped flat. They were testing our defenses, seeing if we'd panic or return fire and waste ammunition. Instead, we stayed silent, waiting. An hour passed, then another. The sun climbed, and the temperature dropped somehow. My hands went numb holding my rifle. Then we heard it, horses coming fast from the north, but not Caldwell's men. These were different. I risked a look over the wall and saw them, maybe 15 Apache riders, armed, moving in a loose formation that spoke of experience. Neil's help had arrived, and they weren't alone. Riding with them, incredibly, was former Marshal Clayton, a rifle across his saddle, and a look on his face that said he'd made a decision about which side of history he wanted to be on. The situation shifted in seconds. Caldwell's men suddenly found themselves outnumbered 2-1 with no cover and nowhere to run. Daniel Caldwell tried to rally his men, but they were already backing their horses away, hands carefully visible, showing they wanted no part of this fight. Clayton rode forward, stopping halfway between the two groups. Daniel Caldwell, by authority I still hold as a territorial officer, I'm ordering you and your men to stand down. Any violence here today will be answered with federal charges. It was a bluff. Clayton had no authority anymore. But the younger Caldwell didn't know that, and more importantly, his men didn't know that. After a tense moment, Daniel wheeled his horse around and rode south, his men following. But before he disappeared over the ridge, he looked back at me, and I saw in his eyes a promise. This wasn't over. Not by a long distance. Clayton dismounted and walked to the fort gate. When I opened it, he looked at me for a long moment, and then shook his head. You're either the bravest fool I've ever met or the craziest. Maybe both. How did you know to come? I asked. He gestured to the Apache riders. They found me last night, told me what you were trying to do. Figured I spent 30 years upholding law. Maybe it's time I actually upheld justice instead. Together with our unlikely escort, we rode to the land office. The clerk's face went pale when we walked in, me, Dakota, Clayton, and half a dozen Apache warriors who waited outside but whose presence was impossible to ignore. I laid the documents on the counter. I'm here to file a claim, I said. Designation of sacred burial grounds, protected status under territorial law. The clerk picked up the papers with shaking hands, reading quickly. His eyes widened when he saw the location, the surveys, the documentation. This is the canyon Caldwell's been. He stopped himself. Sir, Mr. Caldwell has a competing claim already filed for mining rights. Oh, then his claim is invalid, Clayton said, stepping forward. These documents predate any claim Caldwell might have filed by 3 years. They were prepared by a legal resident of the territory who had rightful knowledge of the land's history and use. It was a legal stretch, but the clerk clearly wanted no part of arguing with us. He stamped the documents, filed them, and handed me a copy. This will need to be reviewed by the territorial judge, but it's recorded now. Outside, Dakota looked at the papers in my hand, then at me. He said something in Apache, and one of the other warriors translated. He says his wife was right to trust you. He says you are brother now. I'd come to this territory running from my past. Somehow, in trying to save 2 people from a frozen river, I'd found something I didn't know I was looking for. A reason to stop running, a reason to surround and fight. But Caldwell wasn't going to accept this quietly. Men like him never did. And as we rode out of town, I saw faces watching from windows, men taking notes. And I knew the next move in this game would come faster than any of us wanted. That night, back at the Apache camp where Ayanna waited, there was celebration. Small, cautious, but real. Ayanna embraced her husband, then surprised me by embracing me as well. Thank you, she said in English. You give us future. I wanted to believe her, but I'd seen the look in Daniel Caldwell's eyes. This fight was far from over. 2 days later, someone burned down the land office. All the claims filed in the last month, including ours, were destroyed. Caldwell made sure we knew he was behind it, even though he had an alibi that covered him completely. But here's what he didn't know. I'd made 3 copies of those documents. One I'd given to Clayton, one I'd sent to the territorial governor, and one I'd buried in a place only 4 people knew about. This was no longer about gold or land or even justice. This was about whether men like Caldwell could erase people like Ayanna from existence just because they had power. As I cleaned my rifle that evening, preparing for whatever came next, I realized something. I wasn't running anymore. For the first time in 2 years, I knew exactly where I stood and what I was fighting for. In the icy grip of a Wyoming winter, James Garrett, a man haunted by his past and forever running, plunged into a frozen river to save Ayanna, a young Apache woman he didn't know. As she clung to him in desperate gratitude, her warrior husband Dakota appeared, rifle in hand, ready to defend what was his. Yet instead of violence, understanding bloomed. James chose to stand with them against Caldwell, a ruthless rancher whose greed for hidden gold threatened to devour sacred Apache land and erase an entire people's heritage. Facing bounties, betrayal, and gunfire, James risked everything, not for riches, but to protect strangers who became family. In the end, they didn't claim the gold. They safeguarded the earth itself, turning buried treasure into unbreakable legacy. This story cuts straight to the heart with a timeless truth. Real courage isn't found in running from our shadows, but in stopping to lift someone else from the cold. When we choose empathy over fear, trust over suspicion, and justice over easy escape, we don't just save others, we redeem ourselves. James found purpose not in vengeance for his old wounds, but in shielding Ayana's future, proving that the greatest strength lies in alliances forged across divides, in protecting what is sacred even when no one is watching. In our own lives, when injustice freezes the world around us, remember, one act of selfless bravery can thaw the hardest hearts and change everything. This tale always leaves me choked up, reminding us that humanity's true gold is the bonds we build and the stands we take. What about you? In the comments, share a time you chose to help a stranger or stand for what's right. It might inspire someone reading today. If these raw frontier stories of redemption, courage, and unbreakable spirit speak to your soul, please subscribe and ride with us. More heart-pounding journeys through the Old West are waiting just over the next ridge.